to become still and to reflect the world as a clear pool reflects the sky. Well, why is that important? Well, I can give at least two reasons. One is that if I am to talk all the time, I will not have anything to talk about except my own verbiage, because I won't listen to what anybody else has to say. In exactly the same way, if I think all the time, I won't have anything to think about except thoughts. So just as I have to stop talking occasionally to hear what others have to say, so I have to stop thinking occasionally to have something to think about. Otherwise, I'm sort of like a bookworm, a person who never gets out of the library, who reads and reads and reads but has no contact with the life that books are about. Now, it's very difficult, you see, to have a silent mind, because we are creatures of habit, and we think incessantly. Now, the second reason is that we are very bothered by our thoughts. One reason why Americans in particular don't like to be alone, and even if they are alone, they turn on the radio or the television or read a magazine, is that they're disturbed by their thoughts. I'm left alone with my thoughts, and I start worrying. Why? Because you live according to a world of conceptions. For example, let's say, what do we worry about? We worry about the future, or we regret things we've done in the past. But the future is not here, and the past has disappeared. The future and the past, as it were, do not belong to the physical world. They are abstractions. And what we remember of the past is a very attenuated image of it, and what we predict for the future is never quite like what happens. In fact, it's very unlike it. If I say to someone, "What did you do yesterday?" they say, "Oh, well, I got up in the morning, I had some coffee, I went for a stroll, then I had breakfast, and I dressed and brushed my teeth, and I went up to the office, and I saw Mr. So-and-so," and so on, you know. But this is, you see, you're thinking of your past day in terms of abstractions, which are have none of they're like the bones of events and have none of the flesh on them. When you draw an abstract picture of a human body in stick figures, you know, you draw a round blob for the head and then arms and legs. Everybody knows at once that's a human being, or meant to be, or represents a human being, but it's not really very like one. It has none of the color, none of the flesh, none of the beautiful texture of a human organism. Well, so in thinking of our past as these rather attenuated, dried out memories, we always seem to have had a life of deprived richness. And therefore, as the more we identify the succession of our days with these abstractions, the more we feel that, well, there's something we're missing. As if you were to make a diet of dollar bills, you would suffer from malnutrition. And if you were stubbornly convinced that what you needed was more, you would have not only malnutrition, but serious indigestion. And so in the same way, if you think that what you need is more time, then you panic about the future. You want more future. And you say of something which is no good, it has no future. But what you should say, it has no present. Because when you see you have a silent mind, you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about the past. You are experiencing the present in a very complete way. You are not stopping to analyze each detail. You couldn't possibly ever do that. But you are getting all the details without focusing on certain details which exclude your apprehension of the whole. And so you're beginning to live a rich life and a real life that is completely here and now. Now, neither Whitehead, certainly, nor I am taking in this an anti-intellectual position. We are saying that if you do not know completely how to live in the present, you have no use for plans for the future, because you will never be able to enjoy those plans when they mature. because you won't be there. You'll be thinking about some other future. But what's the point? And in the same way, there is no purpose in the intellectual life unless you are fully aware of that which the intellectual life is about. That is to say, present, vivid, real life. The intellectual life is a commentary on that, is a way of measuring it. And as all measurements are useful for prediction and for control, that's fine. But don't get so involved in prediction and control that all you're doing is controlling. You know, like, is the meaning of life just to find out what the meaning of life is? But that's what happens. And one of the things that is explored in the meditations, the disciplines of Zen people and other types of Eastern philosophy, is the exploration of power. We've been into this a little. Would you really like to control everything? Supposing you could. And every wise person, of course, comes to the conclusion that that's not what they want. Because if you controlled everything, there would be no surprises. But we are, at present, you see, dangerously living into an era of our civilization in which we are over-controlled. In which, for example, the laws cannot operate because there is too much law. In which you cannot do the simplest thing in the way of an enterprise or of business or of anything without having a battery of lawyers to tell you whether you may do it and how you may do it. And the paperwork that goes with everything you do is absolutely intolerable. Academic paperwork is overwhelming. And you will notice that the records in a registrar's office are kept in safes. They are so precious. But the books in the library are easily stolen. That the recording of what is done is more important than what is done. It's like some people who don't believe anything happens unless they've got a picture of it. And who obsessively take pictures of everything. We're having a lovely time. And somebody comes in beautifully dressed and so on. And we say, oh, what a pity no one brought a camera. And I know the Japanese are obsessed with this. Because there you see, they're reacting. They're copying all the terrible features of Western culture. When they go to a great monument, they photograph incessantly. They don't see a thing except through the viewfinder of the camera. And this little box is going grab, 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 grab. And instead of enjoying the gorgeous presence of this temple, this garden, this mountain landscape, they're waiting till they get home and can go through these measly little reproductions of it, see? I sometimes wonder about this thing. I myself never listen to it. But I know other people like to have recordings of these things so that they miss some point, they can catch up with it again. But I don't know. I sometimes have nightmares about a world of echoes in which there are only echoes and echoes of echoes and echoes of echoes of echoes, reverberating forever down the empty corridors of my mind. Now, here comes the problem, though, is how do you make your mind still? The method in Zen is the method of exasperation. They, of course, advocate various technical aids to making your mind still, such as the practice of Zazen, which is sitting, usually cross-legged, on cushions, in a long hall, and counting your breath, so as to eliminate from consciousness any other thought than that of the counting of the breath. And this eventually results in a state of stillness. Only that's not enough, because the skillful teacher feels that this kind of stillness is not yet true stillness. It's forced. And he's trying to get you to a point where it will never be necessary for you to force your mind to be still, but where it can be so quite naturally. And he can only do that by tricks, which are called upaya in Sanskrit, hoben in Japanese, which means skillful means. In pedagogy, upaya means the tricks of the teacher's trade, how he gets attention, how he helps you to understand something. In politics, upaya means cunning, deceit, has a sort of a bad meaning in politics. And so the Zen teacher uses all sorts of tricks to get you away from the fallacy of trying to make your mind still by force, which is like trying to smooth rough water with a flat iron. All you do is stir it up. I am thinking that I am trying not to think. I'm annoyed with myself because I'm not successful, etc., etc. I should be successful. All these are disturbances. All these considerations, they're off the point. But how to get people off them? You have to reach a point, in other words, where you learn to leave your mind alone as you leave rough water alone so that it becomes smooth of itself. But while you conceive you're waiting for this to happen, you're still stirring it up. You therefore have to get rid of the sensation that there is you, the thinker, watching the thoughts. You, the feeler, separate from and trying to control the feelings. Because so long as that separation exists, you'll have trouble. And therefore the function of the koans, the problems, like what is the sound of one hand, is to lead you to the natural seeing through of, debunking of, the concept of the separate thinker and the separate experiencer. So that when you find out that the thinker and the thoughts are not different, then you'll have less and less trouble in allowing the thoughts to become quiet. It's difficult for us to understand this simply because of our language. When we say knowing or thinking, we always feel that this is a function or activity of someone who thinks and knows. That's because we are tied up with this subject-verb-predicate language structure. Now, the same problem is approached from a somewhat different point of view and with a different style, but essentially the same principles are being used in the philosophy of Krishnamurti. Only it comes in a very different way. Because although Krishnamurti is an Indian, and thus we would say in the United States a Hindu, he doesn't present himself as affiliated with any kind of religious or philosophical organization. He comes on simply as Mr. Krishnamurti. And he doesn't present any gimmicks, any obvious techniques, because according to his view, all these special practices are hindrances. In other words, supposing a group of people take up Zen Buddhism. Before you know where you are, they have become a club, a special in-group, and they're the Zen people, and they're going to sell this thing. They're going to say, you should try our Zen, you know. You may be a Christian Scientist, you may be a Catholic, you may be a Seventh-day Adventist, you may be a Theosophist, and all these ways have something to be said for them. But the real thing is our Zen. And then, of course, they all start sitting in meditation posture, and they put up hanging scrolls and burn incense and have Buddhas and gongs and so on. And all that can be used as a sort of social or cultural one-upmanship. And this is a very serious obstacle. Now then, Krishnamurti comes on without any bells or robes. He addresses his audience wearing grey flannel pants and a white open shirt. That's it. And he talks without any spiritual technicalities or even philosophical technicalities. Absolutely dispenses with them. All he really does is ask questions. And therefore he seems to many people as a total debunker who has nothing positive to offer. His approach is invariably one of this. You propose the question. In other words, you asked him to come here. Why? What is it you're looking for? And you ask a question, for example, because actually many of his original followers came out of a theosophical background. They perpetually ask the question like, is there such a thing as reincarnation? Did I have a past life? Will I have a future life? And instead of either saying yes or no, he comes back with, why do you ask? Is there a God? Why do you ask? Go into it. Go into the state of mind you have when you voice that question. Why are you voicing it? Well, people will defend themselves for a long time when faced with that. They'll say, well, I'm curious. Or, isn't it one's purpose in life to find out these things? He said, what makes you think it's your purpose in life? Does someone tell you so and you believed it? Why do you think that's your purpose in life? And you have to back off a little bit. Say, well, I suppose the real reason why I want to know whether there's going to be a future life is that I'm afraid of death. Why are you afraid of death? Well, I don't want to lose my continuity. Aha! So that's the reason, is it? You are clinging to yourself. Yeah. Well, he would say, how can you possibly understand God or anything of a spiritual nature while you're clinging to yourself? Aren't these two activities mutually exclusive? If you want to know what truth is, you must be open to truth, whatever it is. But if you say only that truth will be acceptable to me, which supports my conception of my ego, then you're not open. And you say, yes, I see. But then you say, how can I be open? He says, why do you want to be? See, you're just doing the same old thing again. You ask me how to be unselfish. But what is your reason for wanting to be unselfish? You don't want to be unselfish at all. You want to find a new way of getting around it all. Now, in this manner, he absolutely exasperates people. Because he'll never agree with anything anybody says. If they formulate it and say, Mr. Krishnamurti, is that what you mean? He says, no. Now, look, go into it again. Don't make a formulation. Don't come to a conclusion. Don't want to have a resolution of this. Just be, if you can, open to what is, to what you actually feel now. Don't judge it. Don't say it should be, it shouldn't be. What is it? Say, when you're in a state of grief, what is grief? Don't say a word. Don't try to pin it down. Don't give a definition. Just experience whatever you have labeled as grief. I often ask people when they say they're anxious or something, where are you anxious? And they say, all over. Oh, I say, come now. How do you know you're anxious? What symptoms are there going on in you that tell you you're anxious? And then they begin to notice things in their stomach and headachy things or whatever it may be. And then they come to a more concrete apprehension of the state of affairs that they have labeled anxiety. And in this way, which is really very like Zen because it's frustrating, people come to see there's absolutely nothing they can do at all to stop being selfish. So they see after a while that trying to stop being selfish is the same thing as selfishness. Trying to get rid of grief is grief. And so when you see that, there comes a point which we could best call giving up, surrender. William James pointed this out likewise in his study of the varieties of religious experience and the psychology of conversion. There's the point of absolute frustration followed by surrender. And then in that moment of surrender, when you see you just can't do anything about it, you suddenly have a quiet mind. There is no further effort, you see, to say the thinker and the thoughts are one. That's a formulation. The experiencer and the experience are one experiencing. You don't need to say that. Because that's not the point. The formulation of it is not the point. It is the actual experiencing itself that is the point. But you can't come to that while you are going over in your mind all this chatter about I should accept my experience, I should not accept my experience, etc. As a matter of fact, when psychologists sometimes say you should accept yourself, a lot of people just don't, you know. They're always fighting with themselves, clubbing themselves, and allegedly disciplining themselves. And then they get into tremendous clutch-ups inside, and the psychologist says, now come, you're human, you should accept yourself. You shouldn't feel guilty if you get angry. It's very natural to get angry. Accept yourself. So people try to accept themselves. But then they come across the fact that there are certain things they do not and cannot accept, and they have to accept the fact that they can't accept them. Accept that you don't accept. And then that's the same bind as Buddha put people in when he said, in order not to suffer, you must get rid of desire. But then people find out that they desire to get rid of desire. So you see, that saying, accept yourself, is a gimmick. And it's an upaya. And the object of it is to bring you to the state where you see that the self which does the accepting is the one you need to accept. And in this state where you're confronted with the necessity of licking your own tongue, you suddenly see that what you thought was to be accepted and what was to do the accepting are all one. It's a very awkward feeling at this moment. R.H. Blythe described it beautifully. You were about to swat a fly, but the fly jumped up and sat on the swatter. You were about to punch the world in the nose, and the nose became the same as the fist. And of course, in that moment, one feels awkward. Just as I described in the first talk, the situation of feeling that you and the environment are all one process. At first, that is nonplussing. You're just not used to feeling it that way. Because if the stream of thought or the stream of experience is the same as the experiencer, who's in control? Well, it controls itself. It's what the Chinese call ziran, of itself so, which is their word for nature. And in their organic theory of nature, there is no one in control who stands outside and above the organic system itself. It's the organic system, it controls itself. It's full of the same sort of balances that any organic system has. Because if it didn't have that, it wouldn't be organic, it'd be merely chaotic. So we get back, you see, to what is fundamental in Chinese, Far Eastern psychology, that any ongoing system must trust itself. And therefore, the attitude of these people to human nature is rather different from ours. They would say human nature is basically to be trusted. Not that there's anyone outside it to trust or mistrust it. But they would say, if you don't trust your own nature, how can you trust your mistrust? How can you know that even that's reliable? Because that's all part of you. Now, they will say, yes, in human nature, there are passions, there is greed, there is anger, is an aggressive tendency. But what is good about human nature is it's good and bad. Confucius once said, the goody-goodies are the thieves of virtue. And he exalted above mere goodness in the sense of following a legal righteousness, something called in Chinese zhen, which means human-heartedness, being a complete human. Now, a complete human is always a little bit of a rascal. Not too much of a rascal. The point is that you have a little rascality and you like to put salt in the stew. Now, you certainly don't want the stew to be all salt. But when it's without salt, it's sort of flat. And don't you feel that with very good people? They're awfully dull. You know, when there's a certain kind of oppressive goodness about people of a certain kind, I won't make any labels. But when you come into that, there's something about it that, again, you know, you're sitting on the edge of your chair. Jung once said he met a man in whom he could find no human failings whatsoever. And he was terribly disturbed, because he thought, really, if that's possible, I should put my own life in order. But he said, never again will I be deceived. A few days later, I met his wife. Now, it wasn't that his wife said, you think my husband's good. You should see him when no one else is around except me. Oh, no, it wasn't that at all. It was the wife was living her husband's shadow. She was living out in her life all the things that he repressed in his. And that can easily happen in a very close human association. She, in other words, was the incarnation of his shadow. We all cast a shadow. And it's better to carry your own than to stick it on someone else. So, in talking to a great Zen master, he once said, I really have no other ideal than to be a complete human being. And so that means not only flowers on the top, but manure around the roots. The totality, which true humility is, after all, the recognition of this situation. And it's only when we get to be proud of our humility, you see, that we're in difficulty. So, I sometimes wonder a little bit with Krishnamurti whether he may not be sometimes too earnest. But I realize that that is his public facade because of the tremendous earnestness with which he is trying to get his listeners to be fully here and now. And when they escape from the moment, either by comments attempting to get definitions or even by laughing, he keeps pulling them back to the absolutely immediate experience. And therefore, he's really at his best in rather intimate sessions with people, where he likes to sit around in a ring with people, and instead of giving a lecture, conduct this dialogue, back and forth. The questions come, and then he throws the question back to the questioner. Why did you ask? Look at it. What do you think? And then he throws the question back to the questioner. Why did you ask? Look at it. are you really listening? You said most people don't listen. They wait for the speaker to express their own opinion. And when he doesn't, they don't listen. They try to make sense out of the words. And I was saying to you earlier on, sometimes it's very important to listen to the sound of the speaker's voice rather than trying to follow the meaning of the words. Indians, American Indians, very often do that. If they want to know what a man really is like and what his true character is, they listen to the sound of his voice, no matter what he has to say. You can be awfully distracted by what a person has to say and not see what kind of a villain is coming up against you. So, in both these cases, in the case of Zen and in the case of the work of Krishnamurti, we have two examples of, maybe we could say methods in a certain sense, or methods of non-method, by which we can do something to correct and overcome the divorce of the mind, the human mind, from the physical world. But let me repeat, by saying the physical world, I'm using a word for want of anything better. Korzybski called it the unspeakable world, which is really rather funny. That is to say, the non-verbal world, which is, of course, in a profound sense, the spiritual world, because it's immaterial. That is to say, immaterial in the sense of unmeasured. So these are studies, practices, disciplines, or whatever you want to call them, that are of very great and especial value to a culture as powerful as ours, which is seriously suffering from alienation, splitness, divorce of consciousness from reality. Well, now, the general trend of this seminar has been from the theoretical to the practical. That is to say, I started in the first session talking to you in a very theoretical way about the relation of the individual to the world and showing how our apprehension of our own existence is, when compared with the scientific description of our relation to nature, really a hallucination. And then the problem is the practical overcoming of this hallucination. And so I've discussed with you two approaches which are very like each other to that objective. One, the essential principles of the method of Zen, and the other, the essential principles of the method or non-method of Krishnamurti. Because coming to the Blaisdell Institute are these people, Zen people and Krishnamurti, we hope. So that, don't bruit it around too much, but that's what you're in for. But of course, the work there has a particular relevance for students, for young people. And both these approaches, Krishnamurti's approach and the Zen approach, are very proper and appropriate for young people today. One of the most balancing factors in San Francisco life at this time is the existence of a very strong movement for the practice of Zen alongside the whole wide open world of hippiedom. And many, many young people who are what you might call in the general hippie direction and classification are, as a matter of fact, being beguiled by Suzuki Roshi with the Zen Center in San Francisco to go out to Tassajara Springs at the end of the Carmel Valley and practice Zen meditation. Now, this is a very extraordinary thing, because the sessions in Zen meditation out at the end of the valley are tough. And Mr. Suzuki stands no nonsense. This is a very, very, I don't quite want to say serious, that's the wrong word, because Zen isn't serious. Let's say a very sincere application, which requires a great deal of work, because you don't only meditate, you have to be responsible for the maintenance of the grounds and the buildings and everything. So it's a wonderful training school for young people. But they will go for this in a way that they wouldn't go for discipline under other and more traditional auspices. This is something new. This has a new flavor. But this man, Suzuki, is doing wonders for young people in San Francisco. The difficulty, you see, is with people who get their introduction to mysticism through LSD or marijuana and other chemicals, is that they get suddenly flipped into very high states of consciousness with no background, no way to comprehend it, no way to deal with it, no way to bring it down to earth. And therefore, since there are operating in the same area where these things are happening, experienced people who have long training in knowing how to connect the mystical with the practical, this is a very good influence. And in the same way, I would think Krishnamurti has a comparable influence, although he doesn't act as the leader of an ongoing community, as Suzuki does. This is a more or less touch and go thing. A few meetings, a few encounters, and that's the end of it. It's up to you after that. But both these directions of presenting the problem of self-realization are certainly not frivolous, and certainly require a great deal of self-examination. And this is a great problem which faces us now among young people who are in revolt against all sorts of things that in the lives of their fathers and mothers they feel to be false. They are in revolt against what Buddhists call samsara. Samsara means the wheel of birth and death. But samsara really is the same thing as a squirrel cage, a rat race, where you are working and working and working for you really know not what. A process of gaining money or status or whatever it is, not really to be enjoyed because one feels a little bit too guilty to enjoy it, but to bring up children, to give them expensive and glorious college educations so that they can bring up their children to do the same thing, you see, and it just goes on and on and on and on like this. And so against this rat race, against the absorption, say, of the executive in paperwork and abstractions, against the complete dissolution of the family by reason of husband's absorption in business, wife's absorption in women's clubs, children's absorptions in a school where they're not cared for by their parents. The revolt against all that sort of thing is going on. But it's just not enough to revolt. It's just not enough to take various drugs which open your mind to new dimensions. It's not enough to challenge everybody's standards in clothing, in housing, in family arrangements, and so on. behind and beyond all that, there must be some way of bringing it all to earth, grounding it. As I've intimated already, the fascination of young people today for the mystical and for chemical mysticism is very dangerous. Like every worthwhile enterprise is dangerous. If they weren't doing that, they'd be driving hot rods and perhaps skydiving. Anyway, something dangerous. The young always have to be involved in something dangerous. But this adventure of exploration of the inner world is of peculiar danger simply because it goes into that aspect of our being about which we know least, our own inner life, our minds. But it is of the utmost importance that those adventures be accompanied with some kind of discipline. Now, discipline is a dirty word today among young people. When you say discipline, it means, don't do it. And so I substitute for the word discipline the word skill. Because there is no pleasure in this world without skill. And skill is an attractive word. Discipline is a push-away word, you see? And you, all of you, as I look around to estimate the ages of people in this room, you're all involved with young people. And you must be very conscious, as you all are very conscious, of the strife, the discord, the gap between generations. And so what I myself regard my function to be a bridge person. I've worked all my life to be a bridge between East and West. And now it's thrown in my lap the job of being a bridge between the young and the old. And so now I'm talking to a relatively older group, and I want to say some very serious things to you about how to handle what is happening among young people, especially since this is under the auspices of the Blaisdell Institute, which is concerned with the university and therefore with the education of young people in relation to everything I've been talking about. Because the young are interested, deeply and seriously interested, in the transformation of consciousness, in breaking out from the narrow situation of the alienated individual against the world. But in doing this, they are showing the usual excesses and imbalances of things that young people always do. They're not experienced, they're not mature. Therefore, just for the very reason that they're not mature, they have the guts, or the foolhardiness, if you want to call it that, to go out on these expeditions. But it was always so. In the year 6000 BC, an Egyptian priest was complaining of the decadence and irresponsibility and indiscipline of the young. So what to do under these circumstances? You must not give up your own ground in the sense that there is, as I said, a very definite need for a discipline, for something that will act in the same way as in radio, the ground wire acts to the antenna. It's not enough to have a way out experience and come back and say to your friends, man, it was a gas. Because it is immemorial wisdom that everybody who takes a heroic journey must bring something back. Because if he doesn't, nobody knows he's taken it. He may have lied, he may just have said that he went to the land of the demons and fought with the dragons, and then crossed the perilous bridge and came into the fairy palace. Bring back a fairy's feather. Prove it. This is not merely to prove it. It is also to do another thing, which is the whole work of art. What is art? Art is what Christians call the process of incarnation, the making of the divine word into the flesh, the expression in a material form of vision. And to do that is very difficult. On 100 micrograms of LSD, you may very well have seen the vision of God in a dirty old ashtray. Can you imagine that that's possible? But it is, because what is an ashtray? Ashes, the decay, the falling apart, the burning away, the turning of alive, more or less alive, or at least moist leaves of tobacco into dust. And as you begin to think about that from a sort of certain point of view, it becomes a parable of the process of existence. What is this turning of everything into dust? At first sight, it looks as if it were a kind of a doom. Everything is just going into dust, 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 and blowing away. And you realize that's what you're doing. And by smoking these cigarettes, you're slowly committing suicide, giving yourself lung cancer or something. Then you may remember the words of C.G. Jung, that life is an incurable disease with a very bad prognosis, which lingers on for years and invariably ends with death. Everything you do is bad for you. Like the little boy, 4 years old, who'd got sunburn and his skin was peeling, and he looked in the mirror and said, "So young and wearing out already." You know, all energy wears you out. Everything is going into dust. But as I was suggesting this morning, when you understand that life is, that your birth was being kicked off a precipice, that you're going to ashes. Remember this ceremony in the Catholic Church on Ash Wednesday, and everybody kneels before the altar and the priest puts cigarette ash, or rather the burnt palm leaves from previous Palm Sunday on their foreheads and said, "Remember, O man, the dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." Do you remember the poem of G.K. Chesterton about dust? "What a vile dust," the preacher said, "methought the whole world woke." And he goes on, and he talks about everything being a kind of trembling dust. And he ends up by saying, talking of that final day, no, not the final day, the first day, when God was with the angels. When God to all his paladins, by his own splendor, swore to make a fairer face than heaven of dust and nothing more. So it is to the extent, you see, there's a kind of a paradox in all this. To the extent that you completely accept the dissolution of everything into dust, that by doing that you let go of that clinging to permanence, to yourself, to security, which releases all the energies of life. To the degree, the formula then is, to the degree that you are willing to become dust, to that degree you are alive. And that's how a person could see the vision of God in an ashtray. Now, I've spent a few minutes taking some trouble with words to explain the ashtray as a vehicle of the vision of God. Now, if you're a painter, it's not just enough to take a pedestal. I mean, so let's say you're a sculptor, you're a person who presents objects of art. You can't just get away with putting a nice walnut cube, beautifully polished, filthy ashtray on it, enclose it in a glass case, put a label on it and say, "Beatific Vision." That'll shock people a little bit. That might give them pause. But if you're really skillful, you will understand how to paint an old ashtray or photograph it in such a way that people's hearts will stop. Look at that. And then, but to do that, it will be necessary for you to show all the individual little pepper and salt patterns in ash, as a collection of tiny jewels, which is how you can see them. But you'll have to represent that and carry it out and bring it through. Just in the same way as the people who painted Persian miniatures, which are painted jewelry, would look at trees and grasses and rocks and suddenly show them as full of interior light, enchanted, divine, by a very skillful technique. But you have to have that technique to bring it through. Some possession, some complete mastery of an artistic technique is necessary for the bringing through of the vision. So then our young people have stumbled on a key to the vision, psychedelic chemicals and such things. But they will not be able to bring it through unless they also have the skills. And therefore, the attitude of the older generation in this situation will naturally be one of great concern and worry as to what this kind of easy mysticism, too easy mysticism, shall we say, is going to bring about. All this has become terribly popular for the simple reason that human beings need religion, are starved for it, and that the churches have not delivered. They have not delivered the experience. Therefore, alternatives are being explored. It's quite natural. But you, as I repeat, you are rightly and properly concerned as to what will be the outcome. And the only way to make a good job of it is, instead of saying, suppress the whole thing, which never works anyway, is to emphasize the point, all right, you've done this. This is what you've seen. You've had these experiences. But there is a great deal more to it than that. In my own study of these kind of experiences, I could not have really enjoyed them unless I had before that time been trained in all sorts of ways, not only to understand the doctrines and the symbolism of religions, mythologies, but also simply to speak and write. Because unless you know the art of language, or you know the art of numbers, or whatever it is, whatever is the vehicle through which you express yourself, you can't bring it forth. It's one of the great puzzles of life. Consider people who've had a great love affair. Dante and Beatrice. Everybody knows about that love affair because Dante could express it so gorgeously. But supposing there's some people who've had a love affair, and all the guy could ever say to the girl was, This is a real puzzle, because is that guy any less in love with the girl than Dante was with Beatrice? Perhaps it was the same degree of love. But obviously the effect for mankind of Dante's love was far greater than the guy who can only say, see? They both go into the paradise. They both go into the beatific vision. But one brings it back and shares it. And this is the distinction which is made in Buddhism between two kinds of Buddhas. There's the Buddha who attains nirvana for himself. He's called a pratyeka Buddha. And there is the Buddha who crosses and sees nirvana and comes back to share it with the whole universe, with everybody, with all sentient beings. He's called Bodhisattva. And it so turns out that in the literature of Mahayana Buddhism, pratyeka Buddha is almost a term of abuse, whereas a Bodhisattva is the ideal form of man. Because the Bodhisattva realizes that he does not have the vision, really. Well, let me put it in this way. I don't have it if you don't have it. Because I have it only to the extent that I can give it away. That I can give it up and to, I'm quoting Gary Snyder, up and to all others. But in order that people may master these disciplines, and this is the responsibility of the older generations, it must be understood that working on the disciplines is fun. And this is the task of all good teachers. All good, really gifted and great teachers are people who never have to resort in their classes to artificial methods of imposing discipline. They need no proctors. They need no punishments. They need no bribes. Because the good teacher is the person who makes the work of learning the discipline so completely fascinating that the student is embroiled. The reason being that learning a discipline is not a matter of forcing yourself. And here the English language leaves a little bit to be desired. We have a paucity of words for effort, for application, for concentration. We can talk about, when we're talking with children, you must apply yourself. Now, it's perfectly true. Nothing in the way of a skill will be achieved without practice. But if practice is strained, still nothing will be achieved by it, except resentment. And many a little boy learns to hate the violin or the piano because it was drummed into him, this is what you've got to do, you've got to apply yourself to it, driving it home. But on the other hand, if there is a way of fascinating a child with the discipline of any musical instrument or what have you, then they can apply themselves day after day after day after day and be fascinated with the discipline. So this is the skill of the teacher. This is upaya. I used the Sanskrit word this morning. Skillful means to get the student to love the art. Because remember this principle. If your student does not learn to love the discipline, he will never be any good at what you're teaching him. Now, you may know that certain kinds of scholars do work that most of us would think very tedious. They are, let's supposing I talk a field about which I know a few smatterings, which is the study of Chinese. Chinese scholarship is very difficult. You have enormous amount of characters to study, and you have to look up things in dictionaries and consult volumes of this and volumes of that. But the true scholar is a person who just loves doing that. He'll spend a whole afternoon going after one character through all sorts of things, sifting this reference and that reference. And he'll be having more fun than someone at a bowling alley doing just that. And from the standpoint of an external observer who has no particular interest in this, they'll say, oh, how hard he's working. You know, in my private life, I must confess to you, I've had a terrible time with this. Because I love my work. And people who had absolutely, say, no comprehension or interest in what I'm doing would wonder, how do I keep up the pace? How can I possibly do this, that, and the other? I love it. But then, there are other people who say, you never do a lick of work in your life. You're playing all the time. Just goofing off. It's too easy for you, see? Because you love it. But that's the only way to get it done. And done well, because if you have something that is, say, a good marriage is not the result of forcing yourself into that marriage. Are you seriously supposing that if you say to your husband or wife, "Darling, do you really love me?" and the partner answers, "I'm trying my best to do so," this is simply not a satisfactory marriage. We are not going to get beautiful work by mere effort against the grain. When you could tell a cook instantly by tasting one mouthful of a dish whether it was cooked out of a sense of beauty or cooked out of love. Now, a person, say, who cooks out of true love will, of course, encounter days on which it is difficult. But somehow the overall love of the art will manage to get him through those days when it's difficult. And so with marriage, and so with the mastery of any other art. But it is on the end of the older people, it is up to the teachers, the parents, to present the disciplines of life as something that not just that you ought to know, but as something that it is beautiful to understand. Now, let's look at the whole question from quite another point of view. One certain way of approach is appropriate for the young. But what way of approach is appropriate for the older, so that they shall be able to take this approach to the young? Many of us who are older inherit teachings of discipline which were all forced on us, and we've learned to grow up dull and rigid. And so I could say things to this audience that I would not possibly say in an audience of students. It's up to you to loosen up and to become a little mad. There's no point saying that to a younger audience, because they're going to do that anyway. But a great problem for the generation of parents and grandparents is psychic rigidity. Because we have been indoctrinated for a long time in not being able to trust ourselves. And this morning I was discussing, Chinese ideas about trusting human nature, about spontaneity, the disciplines of spontaneity, and so on and so forth. Now, this becomes of peculiar importance to people who have passed the threshold of the middle of life. Because in the first half of life, if you've lived your life properly, you're supposed to have set up yourself in the world and have established your business, your profession, or whatever it was. And you go on to the second half of life, you've got to get ready to die. Now, are you ready to die right now? Would you like, supposing, we were going to be annihilated by an atomic bomb in, say, 5 minutes. Supposing we're going to be annihilated by an atomic bomb in 5 minutes. What would you think you ought to do between now and then? R.H. Blythe asked this question to a Zen master. What would you do? He said, I would practice Zazen, meditation. Blythe was disappointed in this answer, because he had put it, would you like to listen to your favorite music? Would you like to make love to a beautiful woman? Or would you just go on sort of with everyday life as if nothing had happened, like somebody winding up his watch on his way to execution? He once asked a Zen mistress, there are such ladies, old nun, who's a great Zen teacher, where do you think you're going to go when you die? She said, I don't think I'm going to go anywhere. He said, in that case, I'll go with you. She said, "Oh, that's so nice. That's the first time a man has ever wanted to go anywhere with me." But you see, it is traditional. All cultures have understood this in some way or other, that when you enter the second half of life, the business of that part of life is to get ready to die. That sounds to us terrible, to prepare for death. It suggests preachers coming around and saying, "Are you ready to meet your maker?" You know, ooh. And so, as a result of that, in our culture, death is a thing that is completely swept under the carpet. You go to hospital, and they don't tell you you're going to die. They pretend it's going to be all right. Don't worry. And all your friends and relatives come around when you're lying in bed with cancer on the end of a lot of tubes. And with a kind of weak smiles on their faces say, "Well, won't it be nice in 2 weeks from now when you're feeling better, we'll go down to the beach and this, that, and the other." And you know very well, deep down, even if you won't admit it, that things are pretty rough. Especially when they start talking like that. We seriously need an entirely new approach to death. We need entirely new hospitals. We need sanitaria for the dying, where dying is made into a work of art and a real achievement. Where when you are going to die, and it becomes fairly certain this is the end. I'm talking about this specifically because if you understand the last minute, then you can kick it back into that whole of the second half of life, which is a preparation for the last minute. But the thing is to understand the last minute first. Let's say we take an entirely different attitude to death. Say now, look, quite different. The way we say to the young is build up your strength and your skills so that you can take on responsibilities. But death is where you're going to be absolved of all responsibilities. There'll be no need for you anymore. Quite a different scene. But a very liberating one, if you can learn to enjoy it. Now, a British obstetrician like Grantley Dick Reed has taught women how to have children without resisting it, so that they don't talk about the pangs of childbirth, but they talk about the tensions, about really learning the kind of masochistic ecstasy from having a baby. Now, some new physician has got to come onto the scene now and tell us exactly the same thing about the pains of death. Death is not a disease. Death is very healthy, just as childbirth is. Everybody has to die. You can't possibly call it a disease. You may die as a result of a disease or of an accident or anything, but death itself is not a disease. It is simply the other end of life opposite birth. And instead of regarding it as something to be put off and simply really disregarded, death is something for which one should train oneself as a very valuable experience. Because death is the automatic taking away of all your attempts to cling on to life. All that frightened clutch is simply going to be broken. Well, it's pretty rough to have it broken. Why don't you let go first? Here is the colossal opportunity for you to realize who you really are.